Liz, thank you for joining us. Um, can you tell us about you and your background?
Yeah, happy to. Well, first, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a dog owner, but I also have given my life's work to this point up to education. So I have pretty much 20 years of experience in education. I have a doctorate in educational leadership. I'm on the faculty of at the University of Idaho in the Educational Leadership Department. Um, but really right now I'm just like a lot of parents. I'm juggling work from home. Now I'm a principal and a teacher, and at the same time I'm living my life professionally. So just kind of juggling.
And how old is your daughter, Libby?
Yeah, so Libby is 7,
Okay.
which comes with all sorts of awesomeness. One of the great gifts of having our children at home right now is that we get to spend more time with them.
Mhm.
We can talk about the challenges in a minute, I'm sure.
Started. You said that it's important for parents to remain calm and reassuring during this very uncertain time. It's pretty easy to say, but let's face it, a lot of us are feeling very stressed out. So what are your recommendations for parents? What are some tools to help them remain, somewhat calm, at least on the exterior?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I think that is the question for the time right now, right?
Right. Yeah.
We've all seen multiple examples, too many examples, right? Of how either ourselves or others are panicking in this time, and the reality is that doesn't help anyone. I think when it comes to how to frame this for children, we need to think about it. Well, even for ourselves, but particularly for children, we need to think about it in what are they really going to remember in 40 years, right?
Right.
So Libby, my daughter, when she's 47, what is she really going to remember about this time? And therein lies the opportunity for us to model that, this is a difficult time, that we are human, that we do struggle, that we do, but it's really how we respond and how we figure it out, right? So
Mhm.
now, yeah, easier said than done. I think one thing that has been particularly helpful for our family, and not all families are the same, I recognize that, but is that with our daughter being 7, is being explicit about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and when. So, like for example, yesterday afternoon when Governor Little gave his um, update, I really wanted to watch it. I felt like that was something I was very compelled to do. However, I wasn't quite sure where he was going to go with it, so I didn't think it was appropriate for Libby to watch it, right? And I
Right.
think that's another thing, is that there's this balance between being informed, because that should lessen our stress and anxiety, right? As we are informed, then ultimately, then the rumors and the panic pieces kind of usually settle down. Um, but with that said, with children, having the news on constantly, or constantly looking at your phone and you know, scrolling through whatever social media
Yeah.
you're getting your fix with, isn't particularly helpful. And really, in 47 years, what would Libby see, I guess, is sort of how I've tried to navigate this, is what would she have seen from her mom, right? Her
Right.
mom staring at her phone all stressed out. Yeah, there's been times when, of course, Libby's seen me do that, right, over the time, but I'm trying to model, trying to stay calm, and really, for all the complexities of being a parent and trying to juggle work from home, or maybe being even out of work, and being home with
Yep.
children right now. I think ultimately our best selves can present ourselves from that idea that, like, what do we want them to remember in 47 years? That makes sense. I
Yeah.
also think the power of one breath at a time is really important. And there have been times, so given all of, and my husband's a lifelong educator as well, and so you think about us and you think, well, gosh, if anybody can really do this, it should be these two. Whether we have one child, we have a lifetime worth of educational experience, but the reality is we've felt super overwhelmed over this time too. And I think of times when we removed ourselves, right? Like gone into a space that's away, taken some deep breaths, tried to get some exercise, all of the things that in normal life you would categorize under like healthy lifestyle.
Right.
I think are things that we have to be able to do too. Franklin Covey, a leadership expert, says things like, you really need to sharpen your saw, right? Like if you're cutting down a tree with a chainsaw that's dull, you're not doing your best work. And I think as a parent or whatever your hat you're putting on right now, you do have to take time for self-care.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you said, what is she going to think, 40 years from now? Because, not to put a lot of pressure on parents, but those first early years are really impressionable on children, and it really forms the way, they see life, the way they behave in later years. So it does have a pretty lasting impact.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we do know is that even children that are, ages 0 to even 2, that have no idea what COVID-19 is or no idea what a global pandemic is, they do react and are shaped by how they sense their parents react or those around them reacting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So how are you homeschooling Libby and juggling work at the same time? Is this the challenges that you were referring to earlier?
Yeah, well, I think that the reality is that whenever we try to do two things at once, it's not going to be the same, right? It's going to be like things that might be awesome, but there's also going to be extreme challenges. And this is completely the reality. I mean, teachers are at home with children trying to be teachers and be parents, right? Parents are at home either, that aren't in the education profession, trying to carry on with work or not, right? And I think the reality is we've seen more cats and more messy hair and more kids popping into virtual meetings than we ever have before. And honestly, I love that aspect, right? None of us are perfect. We cannot go for perfect. I think that's the huge piece of all of this, right? So that's the first thing, right? That it's different. And how you did things before is not the same. So give that up, I guess, would be the first way in which we've thought about things. The second thing that we've done is tried to observe what are the activities that so she's 7, really engages with on her own, and that it's good for her to spend some time alone doing such activities, right? Even if she's struggling, even if she's, she would probably call it bored or whatever, that's really okay, right? We as humans need to be okay with knowing, not always knowing what to do, right? But yet still carrying on. So we've sort of structured our day with that in mind. There are certain activities that we know she needs help with, like she can't do on her own. Just like if she were in the classroom with her teacher would be giving her some direct guidance, walking her through. And then there are those activities where it's like, we want you to go outside and be in the backyard right now. And we want you to come in and we want you to draw a picture, for example, about what you've done. That's given us about 45 minutes to do things like catch up on email or reschedule a meeting or pop into a meeting and say, but I think for the most part, as humans, we need to be acknowledged that it's just a balancing act right now. But I think it's okay for kids to be alone at a certain age, obviously, right?
Sure.
With their own thoughts and their own learnings. And so trying to think about the activities that the school district's doing an amazing job of preparing for our kids, right? Is to think about that. How can they be alone, or how, what are the things that maybe need more guidance from ourselves? The other thing I would say also, before I forget, is that we really just need to let go this idea of that they're going to fall behind. Everybody all over the world is grappling with this right now. I mean, I know I'm not nearly as productive at work as than I would be without this. And kids are in the same boat, so not to pressure too much. This isn't a competition by any means.
Right.
And if anything, again, if your family is full of stress and anxiety about making sure that you keep up, well, that's probably what the children are going to understand in 40 years, not any specifics about the content that you were, trying to help them get through.
Yeah, any routines or structure that families have been relying on in the past are pretty much thrown in the trash at this point. So
Yeah.
I think you make a good point. Do you have other recommendations for how, there's so much togetherness right now. I think everyone's challenged with balancing some togetherness, but I loved your idea of having some exercises or activities for kids to do so that everyone gets a break.
Hmm.
What are some other things that you've been doing?
Yeah. I mean, obviously screen time is always a challenge, right?
Right. Yeah.
Always a challenge. And I think particularly now, it's even more of a challenge, right? Because we're being asked to do things via, via virtual spaces like this, like never before as parents. And so are kids. And the reality is that, after everybody's been in this routine of doing this for a little while, everybody's realizing, oh, like, headaches and all sorts of other physical symptoms of, you just can't do too much.
Right.
Um, I think the construct of being alone together is an interesting one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I love that.
we're all staring at our devices, and yet we're still in the same room. We're alone together. So in a way, that is that break. If anything, if you just sort of stop as a parent and observe how your children, when they're doing certain activities with you or not with you, with siblings, and say, like, is this sustainable? I think thinking long term is really a place that's going to set us up. So if you make a decision today that tomorrow you can't sustain, that's a tricky one, right?
Yeah.
So, what we have going right now is my husband's an economist as well as an educator. So we have an incentive program going on right now in our house, which is for all the helpful things that we observe that are unprompted, our daughter's earning points, and then she can use those points towards media if she wants.
So what's the silver lining? I don't know. How can we end this on a high note?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
What?
Well, okay. I'll say from an educator standpoint first, what my perceived silver lining is, and then
Okay.
I'll add it as sort of just a human in general. As an educator, I have to say, schools as social institutions and places of education as social institutions are complex and they're nuanced, and largely, we all make our own meaning about them, right? We think about the way school was in the past, we observe how it is for our children now. It's really easy to critique, but the reality is, I think that all of us are realizing what teachers and principals and
Yeah.
all of the hardworking LPOSD and Wes Bonner and all the other staff from our educational institutions are, doing right now, is that this is complex work. It's social work. Therefore, it isn't, there's no easy straight answer, right? It's full
Right.
of complexity.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's the silver lining. I think everybody's going to be, or my hope is that everybody's a little bit more understanding and forgiving of that. And then I also feel like, it was not me that thought of this, but I have often come back to this. And I saw somebody post this a while ago, a friend that doesn't live in the US. So she was sort of ahead of where we are in the US with the social isolation piece. She said, I feel like Mother Nature has sent us to our bedrooms. And I think that there's some amazing gift here of that, as we are forced to slow down, right? We really have the opportunity to reflect on how we live our lives. And I think that that's an ultimate gift that we should be seizing